extrovert, like someone who I talk to, we talk about like sort of like a well. Like the introvert has like a deep well, and it's just like thought, idea, the reservoir. And I think for the extrovert, the well is like it fills up and then they pour it out. Like they fills up and then they pour it out. They fills up and pour it out. They just keep
pain. I think we'll get into that too. Like we were talking about empathy before. It's like I have no problem relating with someone's pain or empathy. It's like I'm in touch with your emotions more than I'm in touch with my own. Like hip hop has definitely been therapeutic for me though in that, because even the way I'm talking right now has so much more emotion than when I was younger. I couldn't even talk like this. I couldn't even go, hey, what's Yo, 1, 2, check. Microphone check, sounds nice. 1, 2. Yo. I hear me. I hear you. We are getting it ready to run, folks. Should I just kick it off and tell people what's up with this title?
Yeah,
because I know you're trying to find out what's up with this title.
Well, hold up. All right. Clubhouse is live.
Clubhouse is live for business. Well, all right. Let me do my thing then. I'm gonna have to play the mute game. It's the best thing I can do. All right. So let's see. It says Introverse. There we go. 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2. All right. So yeah. Let me do it like this. So the title of this week's episode number 25, timely, coming up on the 25th of Christmas on everybody's mind. I just got back from Home Depot, and it is, boy, it's tough to find basic stuff in there right now. People going crazy. But the socially conscious / creative unconscious. I was telling Bernard at first I was thinking about verse. And I gotta figure out a way to make sure that you guys aren't hearing too much from this. Let's try to figure out how to do that. I'll do my best. So the title, the socially conscious / creative unconscious, what I was really trying to do is figure out a way that I could talk about the point that a lot of times, in hip hop or as an artist, people, I'll do a show and people say, oh, he's socially conscious. Right. And we hear that tag a lot. And sometimes it's a good thing and sometimes it's a bad thing. Sometimes it can unfairly pigeonhole you into a category of which you feel your responsibility is to always be socially conscious. And then, it raises to mind, what does it mean to not be socially conscious? Right. So if we have typically, I think the thought goes like this. If you have a song that's a party song, right, an upbeat kind of dance, get them on the floor song, that usually won't be at the same time socially conscious.
Right.
You know what I mean? It's like you're usually one or the other and not both. And I was thinking about, with the social, we're always talking about the tagline here that we usually say, that the creative extrovert, the social introvert. And I was thinking about, okay, if socially conscious, like, could there be unsocially conscious? Right. And then I was thinking about, well, absolutely the inverse of that of social conscious would be creative. Because if we're using it the way that we do, right? Even when we say, not that social and creative are inverses, obviously, but the way that we say social, introvert, creative, extrovert. I was wondering, what that would be like on the creative side. And it's just interesting that obviously the opposite of conscious would be unconscious. And it had me thinking, the act of being creative. I got into a talk with somebody. I don't remember where it was. It was this week, though. And I was discussing, I know what it was. There were people discussing what I thought was grifter stuff. And, I'm always on high alert for anyone who sounds like they're a grifter trying to sell me anything, right? And so they were going on and on about the manifestation of dreams. And As someone who dreams every single night and remembers the beginning usually and the end. It's weird. There's a lot of stuff in the middle. I don't know what goes on, but I usually remember how I started falling asleep and what the dream was that I fell into. And then it quickly turns into a labyrinth and I can't even keep up with what's in the middle unless I'm woken up, and then I have a strong memory of it. And sometimes I even write it down because it's so fascinating. And the end. And I always can remember that. And they're always connected to what I was thinking about before I go to sleep. The end sometimes gets away from me. I'm like, how does that connect? And then I do it and I connect the dots. I'm like, oh, this is how it happened. But the beginning, I mean, I'll tell you, my son and I, we go to bed. Usually I put him to bed and he wants to talk about math. And so math is frontal lobe. So I'm falling asleep doing math problems and math is all in my head. And it's not like the universe is trying to send me signs or something like that. It's that, no, quite consciously, my subconscious is trying to process while I have some downtime, much like you and I talk about when we take a walk, right? Some great ideas pop into your head, whether it's subconscious or because we know that when your body is active, so is your mind, right? Your mind can't help but being quote unquote creative during these processes that are almost automatic, where you don't have to think. It's like a reflex walking at this point, right? And when you're one, not so much. But as an adult, walking around is a great time. It's like taking a shower. It's kind of automatic and great thoughts come. So I was thinking about this and I was like, granted, that's not unconscious, but the meaning and the idea, of course, being that when we're not trying too hard, it seems to be when my greatest inspiration comes to mind. If I'm sitting down and go, oh, I'm going to write a dope track right now, it's a little more tricky, right? There's a little bit more pressure to do so. And what I was thinking about was how that pressure is similar to the pressure to write something that people have already labeled me as socially conscious. So if they're like, oh, that's a socially conscious rapper. So now I'm sitting down with my pen going, hey, I want to be socially conscious. And it's like, no, just let me be me and I'll be socially conscious probably most of the time without a need to have that label. So I'm wondering, do we stifle the creativity of both our artists and just ourselves in general when we adhere to the label that it is that we think that we are and that we have to be? And whether that's introvert, whether that's extrovert, whether that's creative, whether that's scientist, because I was in a big science room, we were talking about something similar, although not bringing in so much of the creative. And that's really where I landed with it. I was like, are we better off just when we're on autopilot and being who we really are, as opposed to trying to overwhelm ourselves with, okay, now it's time to flip the switch and be creative. Oh, now it's time to flip the switch and be socially conscious or be whatever else it is that society's labeled us.
Well, yeah, there's many points to connect with on what you're talking about. But I guess to connect with what you just said at the end is like, do we pressure ourselves to live up to like these ideas that we are either placed upon us or that we do? Um, I think yeah, I mean, okay, here, I mean, for some people, yeah, definitely. Like, okay, think about like Taylor Swift. I mean, she's doing this big tour right now. Like, she knows who she is and she knows who people see her as. So there's a certain sense where she is like, I must live up to the image of which I've already established of myself because that's what you guys are looking for. Um, and I think that's partially because when you merge your artistry, your identity, and your economy, then there's a reality that you have to do this. It's like, hey, this is what people know me. It's like if tomorrow Sprite came out and said, guess what, guys, we're called Sprit. You're gonna be like, what? Even just changing the E, so it's that it's Sprit instead of Sprite. You're like, okay, I guess it's just, like, people don't like to be messed with. They just want to know what they know and they want to engage with that. Like, don't change your music, don't change the brand. You're Taylor Swift. Interestingly enough, though, I am impressed with how she went from like pop country to pop artist kind of seamlessly. Like, she did a lot of stuff. She went to New York. She became like an ambassador of New York, and she released her pop album. I was like, you're pretty smart. I don't know how she did it, but she did it. Um, but not everybody can do that. Okay, so there's that person. But then there's people like you and I who I think our identity comes first, where we're like, I just want to do what I want to do. Like, if nobody hears it, it sucks, but I'm gonna do it and I'm gonna listen to it if nobody else listens to it. So we're willing to a band in some senses we're wanting to like destroy our image. We're like, I will tear this down because I don't care. Like I just want to go with the next thing that is making me curious. And so if I want to play a banjo tomorrow, I will, because my innate sense of what makes me happy is more important. I was just watching Gary Vaynerchuk on this thing, and he was like, yeah, he's like, I'm not really about money. I'm not really about, you know, all these external things. He's like, the thing that makes me happy is doing the things that I'm interested in. And if the other stuff gets in the way, then there's no point in me doing it. So I think if you're a person who's in touch with your identity and your creativity first, you're willing to tear it all down. But if your identity is like in your reputation, Taylor Swift reputation, and your money, then you're gonna serve the master, which brings you that happiness, or what you think is happiness.
Taylor genius. Um, I don't even understand the Taylor thing is beyond my scope. It's just what an enigma. I think it's funny. I just to veer off on that for a second. You mentioned some big hitters there, that Gary Vanderchuck, and for somebody who doesn't think about money, he's doing pretty well. And I think that's true for Taylor. I mean, Taylor is like the artist, and not that I know any of her songs other than the ones that are popular, but from seeing enough interviews with her and hearing her talk, I mean, she's like the consummate artist, but she's become the consummate pop artist. Consummate, she really at heart, she seems like a singer songwriter folk kind of person who's just connected to the vein, right? And just blew out of proportion, like you said, multi genres, just smart, very calculated, worked with an entire team too. I know a little of her upcoming, the way that she got on, and she was literally manufactured into being who she is, but she is that person. She worked at her songwriting, she worked at her craft, she was a consummate professional working, right? And it's interesting because I'm sure she deals with that too, as a person. That's a really good reference point to even think about. I mean, without knowing her, obviously, it's like you think about someone who has to churn out that much material, and the industry pressure is on her. Oh my gosh. Can you imagine the pressure that's on her to get deadlines and turn things out and be who she is 24/7? And to not have major things blowing up means you have an amazing team around you. Because here's the thing, it has to be blowing up. It has to be out of control. It has to be wacky. There has to be moments where she's dropping F bombs or doing whatever vice she does that we just don't see, right? And she comes off squeaky clean, much like a LeBron James, right? It's like, people got on him when he did, me and my team were going down to South Beach and all this kind of stuff. And people got mad at him for saying that and looking like, he thinks he's the man kind of thing. But man, that dude's never had an incident, nothing. And it's like the team that helps you just be that professional, be that creative, just get out, you do basketball, you do music, and we'll make sure everything else works. I mean, I know for me, that it's hard to quote unquote be creative when you're trying to handle all this other kind of life stuff that's coming at you. And it's not that it's hard to be creative; it doesn't quell the creativity. It just shortens the amount of time you have to do it. It's like I feel like give me 45 minutes of unadulterated 45 minutes of where I can just go and create. I got so much on my mind. Like we've talked about this before, having so much preparation and thinking about what you want to talk about and have practiced the craft that it can be somewhat like, okay, I'm going to snap my fingers now. I'm going to create something. But we all know there's a different level we can all go, right? Like there's a different level we can go when we're like, ooh, let me come up with a concept that really is resonating what I'm feeling inside, that vibration that I'm feeling. And once I hit it, then let me be creative. And then I think when we hit that point, there's all this stuff we're talking about doesn't matter. Whether it's the social conscious label or you have to be in your unconscious walking around in the yard for the ideas to hit. Once you're in that, like, ooh, this is where I want to be spot, you get that, ooh, watch out world kind of feeling, and it's so it still is what I said though at the outset is still to me an important feature because you still have to um, deal with all these things that are going on, managing your whatever it is in your job and your day to day and your work life, your home life. You still have to manage the expectations of who you're supposed to be to get to your happy place, to get to that zone where you feel like you can be creative. And your boy Vanderchuck, oh my gosh, I mean, like he's not your boy, but my man Cocaine, Jay Cruz, it's his boy. He's like, was it Coffee with Gary V? Like he watches that stuff religiously, and that is that man's creative endeavor. Like, you're not telling me he's not planning for that. Like, you're not telling me that's as unscripted as that looks. You're not telling me that that's just him waxing poetically every day. And if it is, he's gotten to that place where he's so good at it that it's like,
Right.
okay, he's, I mean, in a microcosm, he is. It's funny you mentioned him. He's similar to what I'm talking about. It's like that dude is being himself, it seems like, and it works for him, right? It's like he's just getting up there telling you the real, authentic, well, the authentic, unadulterated, whatever you want to call it, raw and rugged from what I know of that dude. And it just boom, and he hits it. I would not call him socially conscious, but I would say that that dude is um I don't know if he's bad for the kids or anything like that, but what I'm saying is like he seems to be the guy who's like, screw the grifters. And I do that all the time. He seems to be like, screw these people trying to tell you you're going to get rich fast. You're going to do this. You're going to do that. Like this, I like that he's really direct and blunt. And I like that
Right.
that dude just like, it seems to be like he's in his happy place when he's doing his show. I could be
Right.
wrong. I don't know him enough, but it seems like that dude gets into his zone and he's like, finally I can be free to be me. But he's incorporated into his life, much like how we do even this show. It's like you get this time where you're like, oh, cool. I get to do, get to kind of talk with what I need to be. But I think we need that time, though. I just think we need that time where we don't have anything scheduled. We have that time to do those walks, to do those, I like,
Right.
I could fold socks. You know what I'm saying? And then it's like Eureka. So I look forward to folding socks, bro. I look forward to cleaning my junk drawer. You know what I mean? And then it's like, then it comes up as opposed to being too busy all the time doing the social kind of work. Actually, it's like, am I bad because like I can't volunteer this weekend? You know what I'm saying? I turned down a couple opportunities this week that were things that I would normally try to do, especially this time of year, that I wasn't able to do. And it's like, am I a bad person because I did it? Because I know I'll be more productive if I don't overextend. So it might, and I feel guilty because then you're gonna see me and you're gonna be like, "Yo, isn't he posting videos of him shooting basketball in the gym?" Yeah, but for me, that's that time where I'm
Right.
unconscious. You know what I'm saying? And it's the catch-22. I feel.
Um. Okay. Where there's so much. Okay. So I think
I know I'm all over the place with it, but
it's just there's just so much to connect. I think that okay to
and shout out
set
to Epi, by the way.
yeah, well, I was gonna get to his comment in a minute. Um,
There's a big
because
new
yeah,
one there.
being yourself has been a problem since the Bible and the beginning of religion. But those who do them are the most controversial only because we're used to so many fake people. They can't tell that person is just genuine. Yeah, I totally agree with that. There's a lot with that. So I'll try to weave that in at some point. But yeah, okay. So the word I was gonna say is organic. That's one of my favorite words and things to talk about is this idea that we are organic organisms. But everybody teaches you, at least in this American culture, to be organized, right? There's like even the I did a whole recording on this. I was like how the word organized is it's like the word antisocial. It's like, oh, you're really organized. It's like they're basically saying like there is a particular way to define organization. And it's like, well, when I think about my life and I've tried to be quote unquote organized, it never works. I've learned that if I just have containers, that's as good as it's going to get. So I got stuff falling out of containers, but it's contained. It's not going to be alphabetized. It's just like that's how I am. Like I have no problem going through the lyrics that I wrote 10 years ago and just, oh, yeah, yeah, I could have filed this so it's easier to find. I'm not going to do that. I'm just not going to do it. Part of me likes, like you're saying, folding the socks. Part of me enjoys the unplanned mystery of like, ooh, when I sit down and go through these papers again, it's gonna be like oh yeah, 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 this. Oh, let me set this aside. No, let me not set. Like, I honestly, probably more than most people, I like for things to be unscripted. Like when I go home to parents' house where I grew up, I'll watch sitcoms, and even though they're on demand, I like when they just come on. Like I could go find it. And I'm like, nah, I'm not gonna go find. Like I don't want to find it. I just want to see how they programmed it because I just want to experience that uncoerced flow made by me. Like, yeah, on demand is cool because sometimes you want to pause, come back. Sometimes you want to be able to watch things when you want to. But I mean, I now that we have both, it's like, oh, I have on demand, but I also just love that I can just not be in control. Now, most people won't say that, and Americans like, oh, we need data, we need predictions, we need results. I don't want any of that. I mean, that's like the core of us. What we talk about freestyle creativity is like, I can't tell you what I'm going to say in the next 20 minutes in the freestyle. That's why it's free. Like if it was planned style, you'd be like, "Oh, wow, that's really dope." But when you say, "Yo, that was on the spot," people go like, "Yo, that was spontaneous." Like one of my words on my Instagram is, or I came up with it. I don't remember if I put it on my Instagram. Re-spontaneity. So it's like response and spontaneity. So I mean that's when you're talking to a person, you're looking for that respontaneity. You don't want to know. You don't want to know what they're going to say. You want to be surprised because if you knew what they, I mean, it would be talking to a computer, right? So we as humans, that's naturally in us. But I think to Ken Robinson's point is like you're educated out of creativity. I think similarly, you're like sort of educated out of spontaneity and organic way of life.
Yeah, I think the bad rap too that that freestyle gets, and sort of the off the cuff, off the dome spontaneity. You know, the to, you know, even your play on words. The any way you slice that, there's a bad rap out there for you just did that off the top of your head because um, I think if we were putting in the average amount of time behind the scenes, then you'd get average results. And people are only going to say that when something is actually good, you know, or unless they have nothing else to say, maybe they just do using this filler. But when when you get this just genuine response, no way, you just did that off top, you know, and people are checking, and you know, it means you're doing something right. But it's because you're spending so much prep time behind the scenes. It's not, you know, never to get it twisted. I've heard some people take that. I've even heard other people be interviewed and talk about freestyles ahead of time, and people run off and say, "Yo, he said his freestyles are prepared." No, no, no. I'm prepared for my freestyle. There's a difference. You know what I mean? Like, I am never nervous to freestyle
Right.
ever, ever. You know, I have the only time, like, I might not want to freestyle. That's a difference. I don't want to put myself in certain situations. I don't want to freestyle at every crowd, every show,
Right.
especially if someone just did something that was like, you know, and I'm just like, I don't want to make it look like I'm going up there to show them up and all this kind of, there's a lot of situations, right? But it's like, no, I am never at this stage of my life, never nervous to freestyle. It's
Right.
never, ever, ever. I'm nervous to do actual recorded songs sometimes because I don't always know the words. And it's to your
Right.
point. It's the lack of spontaneity that's required in a song that's already written is a different, I mean, we know it's a different region of your brain. We were talking about that before too. It's a different region of your brain that lights up. Slight, I mean, all regions of your brain light up. But we're talking about the ones that are most active. That's another myth out there too. We're not using the part of it. We use all our brain. We use an unbelievably big part of our brain. You know, people are like Einstein only used whatever percent. It's every time he's thinking, he's using his whole brain. By the way, folks, it's just where the region is centered at of where the most activity is. But to say that, you know, I'm going to freestyle a lesson today, you should be nervous if you don't know the character of that person who says they're going to do that. Like, when I
Right.
say lesson, I mean like an instructor, right? Like if an instructor told me and I'm their boss and they're going, no, I'm not doing lesson plans. I'm just coming in and winging it. I'm nervous because I don't know you. But if I know
Right.
you, Bernard, if you
Right.
told me that, I'm like, cool, man. If I'm your boss, I'll be like, hey, man, go to it because I
Right.
know you. You know,
Right.
I know you wouldn't come out half booty. You know, so when we say that, we're usually scared of, like, what is it, the Immanuel Kant universalitarian, like, would you will that be a universal maxim? No, I would not will that freestyling is the rule, because if it was the rule, that means the average person and below are going to kind of be stinky at it, and we don't want you doing it. But if you've put in ridiculous boatloads of work at your craft, by all means freestyle. We're excited to see it. We want to see a
Right.
basketball player unscripted do a move they've never done before too. We want to see anyone, a painter, everything. We want to see that real raw raw. You know what I mean? So that's my
Yeah,
take.
I mean, it's interesting you say that because yeah, I signed up to do this kids camp several years ago, and I remember being frustrated because the lady who was in charge, she's like, "Yeah, I need to see like a curriculum soon," and I was just like, um. And first thought I was like, why you're not teaching the class? Number two was like, I know me. Like that's the introvert thing. I know me, so therefore I don't understand why you don't know me. And that, that's the introvert's dilemma. Is like when we meet people, we're like, "Oh, right, this is your first time getting to know me. By the way, I'm amazing, so you can just you can relax." Um, but yeah, I think the organic, the freestyle, the free flow, that
Later, Epi.
idea.
Sorry,
You
man.
said,
Epi just shut us out. Yeah, and we got to answer that question too. By
I
the way,
know. How do I
gotta
manage
get
being an
here.
introvert? Oh, we're
Mhm.
gonna. Hey, what's up, AS? We're gonna get to you in a second. We were just finishing these. But yeah, how do you like the Okay, yeah. Like the funny thing, I think we've talked about this before. When people ask me to do something, yeah, it's funny. Like if someone say, "Hey, can you come in and do something?" I'd much rather freestyle because I don't have to work. It's just like, yeah, I can come in and freestyle for 5 minutes because if I have to memorize my other poems, I'm gonna be like, oh, okay, do I remember that line? Do I remember that line? And also, it's more fun for me. I'm like, yeah, I've already done this poem 20 times. Like I know it's good, and you guys here, you're gonna be like, ooh, ooh. It's like, well, I'm tired of doing that poem. I just want to go up there, pick some words out of the air. Here, throw me a word, throw me a word.
Right.
And there's so much energy too. It's like the thing about freestyle is that I think it speaks to aliveness, right? It's like you can only get that with a presence. Um, and I recorded something about that like a few weeks ago. I was like, yeah, that's the thing that people are impressed by freestyle. It's the fact that, whoa, this person is alive, right? Like when you read a book or you read somebody's lyrics, you can see something that's talented and be like, wow, this is incredible. But it's way different than when that person delivers it. Like I always remember looking up lyrics in high school to rap songs or pop songs. Oh, pro, I guess he's coming back. Uh, what happened? I can't hear you.
Sorry. No, I was just centering on you because
Oh,
you're
okay. Oh, I thought you had left the host. But
no, no.
I remember looking up lyrics and I always be hilarious because it would be like ooh baby baby, ooh la la la. So when you read that, your mind is like, oh, that's so silly. But when you remember listening to the song, you're like, oh yeah, they do say that in the song. And I remember reading a book about script writing. It was like when you write your script, you should say it out loud because your head voice is deceptive. And we've talked about this too. Like both of us have written stuff, and then when it's time to record it, we're like, "Yo, how come this is not on beat? How come this
Mm,
is?" And you're like, "Oh, right, I forgot about I have breath, and my esophagus is expanding at a certain my diaphragm." And like so I remember I did this
mm.
last year. I wrote something so perfectly, and I couldn't really do it out loud because I was in a room full of people. But then when I was ready to record, I was like, "Well, lay this down, done." And I was like, I was so frustrated. So when people freestyle, the thing that is there is breath
Mm.
and livingness. And so I think people like that because they're like, oh, this person is doing something alive and living, but
Right.
it's also amazing as if they had planned it. So I think like we
Yeah.
people crave this organic, this freedom, this freestyle because it speaks to something deeper than just rap. It's like, yo, I want to be alive.
Mm.
Like I want to be alive like this guy. I wish I could get up and just
Yeah.
speak
Yeah.
off the cuff. I wish I could. I mean, forget about freestyle. I mean, this project I did called Hip Hop for President. One of the main themes was rap artist runs for president, and so every time you see him on stage versus opponent, like he's rapping, and the person's like the other person's reading from notes. Because I hate watching politicians on the teleprompter. We need a nation full of freedom and liberty. Like you don't know what you want, like you have to literally read words off of a screen. Now, I can understand if it was something like, "Hey, how much gases have been released each year for the EPA report?" Like, yeah, you want to be specific and know numbers, but you can't tell me from your heart as a politician that you care about freedom, uh, liberty. You can't tell me off the dome. You have to. I can't stand that. That's why it's so hard to listen to politicians. It's like you're telling me something, but like this you're telling me something but you're reading it.
It's funny because I will never be confused for a Trump fan, but it is what I love about watching Trump when he speaks. It's like it's going to be freestyle session. He's coming off script.
Yeah,
It's like homie is
I
It's
actually
a
recorded. I
it's a
recorded.
freestyle.
I recorded something. I said Trump is hip hop. I was like, that's why people are attracted to him. Well, one, he's like Eminem. He's like he says stuff that people are like, oh, I can't believe he said that out loud. That's what I said. He's unpredictable. Like he says this stuff, you're like, yo, I can't believe he just said that. Like whenever Trump is on stage, it's a straight up freestyle battle. He's just like, look at this guy. Look at this guy, Sleepy Joe. Like he's got
Yeah,
insults,
but
he's got
but
bars.
it's just like people stopping for the train wreck, it's like, "Oh, we gotta," like, "Here it comes. It might happen today," like, we might see, that's the appeal of live TV. That's so he's an entertainer. I mean, he's captured into it. He's like, "I'm gonna say something ridiculous," and honestly, his boy, I think Kanye is tapped into it too. Kanye's trying to be as outrageous as he possibly can.
Right,
Now he's outrageous in what I would say is a negative way, but that's my take. You could be outrageous in a positive way, but we know that negative news sells and positive news doesn't. So it's hard to be sensationalist and be on that truth. It's like, how do you be sensational and still be keeping it real, right?
right,
The closest you can do is due to Trump. You can exaggerate certain aspects of society and hone in on those, regardless of their truth. It's like it's funny. I was a friend of mine posted something on Facebook today about Epstein, right? He posted about the Epstein trial, and he's like, "Hey, where did that list go, and all those people?" And I was like, whatever happened to him? How come that's gone away? And I'm like, in my head, I'm thinking, yeah, that's true, but I'm also thinking, well, it's gone away because A, he's dead. B, his
right,
girlfriend got arrested for like 25 years, right? They just had to settle a case worth what I think is a pittance compared to what the crime was, but it was like 125 million or something like that, right? And so it's like, uh, there's all the rest of the people aren't really all that high news, and some of them, Prince Andrew included, right? They settle out of court or whatever, and it kind of goes away. That's kind of the way the system works, right? You can pay for it to go away. It kind of does, and there's probably a few other low level names in there. They don't have as strong of a case, probably, and it's like that's it now. But mixing the truth with that, you want to get people riled up, you talk about a bunch of pedos, right? And now you can rile up anyone with that topic because we all at our core are shaken by that. But it doesn't mean that the rest of everything that you're saying is true. And that's where Trump
right,
will get it. And it's funny because he's so connected to that, yet the same group of people that usually follow him make him immune in this way.
right.
Like they want to focus on this, but they never mention his name. But that's neither here nor there. But it's
Well,
interesting those people that are able to sensationalize and just
right.
highlight, sort of the weirdest aspects of society and make it work.
Well, I'll connect to that. Then we'll get to AS because I do want to answer his question, his or her. Sorry. Um, But to your point though, this connects back to what you were saying about the conscious rapper though, right? Like if you're considered a conscious rapper, it's like Common, Most Def. There's a sense that like you got the flute samples and the bass, upright bass off the album. There's a certain sound that comes with your beats. You can't
Yes.
be pop, you can't be
Yes.
polished, you can't be like Shiny Suit, P Diddy, Mace samples. You got to
You got
be
to be
the kind of
speakeasy. You got to be speakeasy.
yeah, you got to be underground. I mean, it's like, I talk about those other things. Like if you watch any documentary on like the black history, it's like gospel and jazz. It's like, dog, I'm sure there's more music that black people like than gospel and jazz, but this is like the sound that we're gonna use to like emotionally connect you. But to your thing about the truth, right? It's like that was one of the themes in Hip Hop for President. It's like, yo, this dude's gonna speak the truth. But it's like soon as this dude speak, like yeah, the first opening episode, if you see it on my YouTube, is like shiny, glossy rapper versus like conscious rapper. And like even though the conscious rapper is spitting, it's like this other dude is more funny and charismatic. Like I said, he's alive and it's about the breath and the facial expressions and the persona. But if a person who's speaking truth, they're seen as too like cerebral, intellectual, introverts. So I do think that is interesting what you're saying, like the person who's speaking truth and also being sort of dynamic with their talent. Uh I guess yeah, it'd be I think we might have talked about this before. Like, is there a person who is like, yo, this person is like hitting me in my chest with I
Mhm.
don't want to hear this, but also it's kind of dope.
Mhm.
Like I think it was a Mitch Hedberg joke or I don't know, somebody got a joke out there,
Mitch.
but something like, yo, this is like philosophically hitting me in my chest, but also this beat is kind of beat is kind of banging. And I don't think those are things are mutually exclusive. I think if the music is done in the right way, somebody can spit truth.
Mm,
But there is something about truth that is fundamentally jarring. I think, I mean, I watch this podcast called Track Stars, and they highlight Christian hip hop, and they're always like, "Yo, how come nobody wants to hear this?" I was like, "Dog, the Bible tells you that people don't want to hear the truth. So first and foremost, you in the club, you're like, "Yo, this is my joint." Like I think one of the guys said, and then all of a sudden, like, "Yo, why you sleeping with that girl? How come you not? How come you living in lust?" You're like, "Oh wait," like it messes with your worldview. So it can be difficult to speak
right.
the truth because it messes with people's whole
Yeah, yeah,
emotional ideology and everything, even if the beat is banging. So I think there is that interesting paradox. Is like even if you are amazingly talented, if the person just doesn't want to hear the truth, it doesn't really matter how great you are because the truth is the thing that's really messing up their night.
right,
You're
right,
blowing
right.
my high.
Yeah, I mean, I'll get into Clubhouse. Shout out to Clubhouse. I'll get into Clubhouse. I talk about this constantly. I'll say this, my kid will be in the kitchen, and why can't you listen to Clubhouse without people cursing? It's
Right.
like I am not perfect, right? Like granted, like curses have definitely come out of my mouth more so than I like to admit. However, I'm conscious about it. Like my natural default is not as good as what I actually put out there. My brain is thinking curse, but I'm self-editing most of the time. And when
Right.
I'm not self-editing, it's usually because I'm conscious of the crowd that it's okay. Like I'm surveying the crowd and going, am I going to deeply offend anybody here? That's just me, right? If I'm in a big stage and it's a comedy show or something like that, I always have a catch 22 with it. I'm like, first when I first got in, I was like, whatever. I'm at a comedy show, I can just curse. And then I'm thinking, more and more about it, and I'm like, do I really need to? And I do it with my music as well. My man Quo, we're working on a new material, whatever, and he was like, "Hey, we're gonna stick to that like the whole second time around," because his stuff he curses all the time. I don't, So I'm like, it doesn't really pain me. I do generally deter to the fact of, do you need to? You know what I'm saying?
Right.
Like, what's this really doing for you? And so when I hear people get in rooms in Clubhouse, and we'll definitely, I have a kind of my own shot at the AS answer here too, but and people just like I was in a room the other day. We hosted a room on science. Me, a physicist, and a chemist, right? And we did this room in science, and we're talking about why science has a bad rap. And the first dude who got up on stage was Looney, right? And he gets up there and he's talking about all kinds of craziness or whatever. You could tell in 2 seconds. And he was talking about his career, which totally didn't match with that. And he was just weird. And then he left and he was all upset and he was like insulting and that kind of stuff, right? And then the room was fine after he was gone. My thing is, you don't know the room of people. Is your first instinct to come in and just start cursing?
Right.
And he did. He's just within 3 seconds, he's like cursing all over the place. And that's what I'm saying. It's like, we know that the curse label sells hip hop, right?
Right. 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 Right.
Therefore, not having it, you could say it doesn't sell hip hop. And we could say that we know socially conscious, just like the Jay-Z line to Talib Kweli, he had the common sense line that he says, he's trying to basically, in a nutshell, what Jay is saying is like, I'd like to rhyme like common sense and Talib Kweli, but I can't because it doesn't make common sense. It doesn't make dollars and cents, right?
Right. Right.
Lyrically, be Talib Kweli, like that's who he'd want to be, but it doesn't pay the bills. And
Right.
so
Right.
I've always said, who cares? Because I'm only shooting for 30 to 100 grand a year extra from hip hop, right? Like that's like my sweet spot. I don't need to be a billionaire. I'm comfortable being a 200 millionaire, So I just think if more people shot for 200, not 200 million, 200,000, shoot for 200,000 a year, and life is a lot easier. Life is still really good. Life is really, really good if you're making six figures, low six figures. Why do you have to search for low nine figures? You know what I'm saying? It's like the you can make a low six-figure career talking about truth, talking about things that matter, things that are substantive. Do our egos need us to be super, super, superstars? Now, I'm saying if somebody wants to make me a nine-figure heir, I'm going to take it, right? But I'm not going to schedule my world around trying to be the one in a million who's stressing out living their life to be a mega pop star and say all the stuff I don't agree with to get there, right? You
Right.
can live a great life. You can make 100 grand a year if you really know what you're doing and you really stick to it just on music, but you're just not going to be a superstar. You're going to be a sort of star. Right? And are we
So
not okay
funny.
with being a sort of star? You know what I mean? It's like that's a whole nother issue. So AS, this is kind of where I'm coming with this too. So being an introvert in college, this is what I would say. I'm still in college and I'm still an introvert, right? Now, granted, I'm teaching, of course, but there is a very fine line between teaching and being the student. Being a student, being the professor, being the student, being the teacher. In fact, the reason I wanted to stay in it is because I love being a student so much. Now, what I loved about it was the quest for learning, and I did like the social atmosphere, even though I didn't partake in it all the time. I liked the idea that I had it there. I liked the idea that there was a gym. I liked the idea that there might be a show. There could be a cool club that I might want to join. There could be a radio station I might want to work at. I could work at the newspaper. It was there for me at my beck and call if I chose to be assertive and be, we're not all 100% introvert, 100% extrovert, right? So if I felt like an extrovert that day, I didn't have to go develop this whole apparatus to do it. I didn't have to go find a new set of friends. I didn't have to go like the university, the college had that opportunity. I could have a small set of friends and a small set of people that I was cool with, but I could go to a talk. Going to a talk is an introvert special, right? If I could go to a talk every single day, I would go to a talk. And before, and you make these choices when you get married, when you have a family, you do these things. I didn't get married until I was almost 40. So it's like I made a very conscious decision and said, you know what I'm going to do before I do? I'm going to documentaries. I'm going to movies. I'm going to clubs. I'm going to hear people speak. I'm going to study. I'm going to read. I'm going to work on music. I'm going to travel. I'm going to do all the things I do that allow me to be an introvert and be really in my zone with it. College allows you to pick and choose. You can build a club or you can join one that's already up. Now you got to take some initiative, and I know introverts do take initiative. You got to look. You got to do the search if you haven't done it already, and be like, what do we have here? My answer always comes down to this for every student. And Bernard, I'll let you hit on this too. I say to every audience, as long as they're old enough to hear the words, I say pimp college. Pimp college. It's there for you to pimp it. Make college everything you want it to be for you because you can customize it. So if you want to be in the debate team, you can be on the nerdy debate team. And if you don't have one, you can make one. If they don't have a math club, you can make one. And your funds and everybody else's funds at that school fund it if you can just find, usually it's 10 people. If you can find 10 people at most schools, they will sanction your club and you can be the president. And if you got a faculty member who champions that idea, man, I champion the artist collective. Of course, I'm going to roll with the artist collective, right? Of course, they're going to ask someone like me. Shout out to P.S. Perkins, who did it as well, too. She was also on our album. She was doing that as well as an adjunct. So you can find an adjunct professor that vibes with you and a few other people. And before you know it, you have a club doing exactly what you want. It could be the introvert club, right? Have the introvert club. It would probably all be online. But, but, you make it what it is. You can customize it. That's what I love about the college experience. And don't let it get away from you. Like, yeah, your main priority is to tackle your studies, but don't do what I did as well. I started figuring that out by my junior year. And my junior year, my senior year, I really freaked it. My freshman year, I joined the radio station. I was the urban music director by the second semester. I was going to free conferences. I was going to conferences that I was performing at literally as an MC, and they were paying for me to go as the music director to the same conference I had to go to that wouldn't pay for me to stay, even when I was performing. Right. So the hustles that you can do, the pimp college that you can do is incredible. I was promoting shows in Lowell, Massachusetts because I worked for the radio station, because I worked for the newspaper, and because I designed ads. So because of that, I could design the ad, review the club, play the music of the artist that was going to be there, and I became sort of the epicenter for that thing, all within a very introvert world of doing a radio show. Looks just like what we're doing right now, one or two people, and making an ad by myself, writing an article by myself. And yes, then I would have to show up at the club and promote the club. But promoting the club was the very small aspect of it. Everything else was me by my onesies or twosies doing what I do, you know? And I would say, that is why I want to stay in college forever, because it has so much of the ability to customize and craft it to your likelihood and your likeness.
Yeah, AS. Hopefully you're still listening. Looks like you're listening from YouTube. Um, Man, there's so much to say. I'd be curious to know if you had a more detailed question because I have. You're saying, how do I manage being an introvert in college? My intuition says you're thinking about the social aspects of college versus just college. Because if you think about college, like Pro saying, college is very introverted. You know, it's college, a university is like an introvert's paradise. It's like libraries, thinking, philosophy, professors. So
All you can eat cafes.
right. Yeah, there's
Right.
like different buildings you can go into, like stacks you can hide in. So there's, instruments you can play and lobbies and stuff like that. Different, quads to hang out in. So I assume you're talking about the talking to people, the getting to know people, the dorms, all that stuff. First thing I'll say, check out share my screen. I recommend this book to everybody. I already read it. Susan Kane, Quiet. Susan Kane. I need that endorsement. I need that I need that check, Susan Kane. But yeah, Susan Kane Quiet is the power of introverts in a world that can't stop chattering, I think, or can't stop talking. Uh Read that book. Very good
Talking.
book. It gets into all kinds of things. And one of the main things it talks about is like redefining yourself. That's what I'm always telling people is people think of introversion as like some kind of disease. And she says that in the book. Like people think uh like this is something I have to overcome or something I got to get rid of, like it's some kind of like COVID or something, like, oh guys, I had introversion for a week. It's like, no, this is the thing that makes you who you are, and it's the thing that makes you amazing. It's just it's not typically valued
Get the
in
shot.
certain
Get the jab.
it's just not typically valued in certain instances. So she starts off with a story. I mean, spoiler alert. So she starts off with a story about herself, how she, I think she's a was a lawyer, is a lawyer. So she basically was at, or some kind of negotiator. She was at a business meeting, and the person on the other end of the business transaction from the other company was getting very irate and just loud. And but she just kept her calm and just kept responding, very even keel. And her boss was impressed. Was like, "How did you do that? Like, how did you?" She was like, "What are you talking about?" She's like, "I just." She's like, "You didn't go off. You didn't lose. You didn't lose control." And then she realized, like, oh, like this is my thing. The fact that I can just be steady. I've had that experience too, where I was mentoring a group of students, and it was this 72-hour film competition, and so you know a lot of the people in charge are like, "You guys got to go, 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 and it's gonna be wild." And my group of students was like, "Oh man, we're getting stressed." I told my students, I said, "You guys can stress if you want. I'm about to have fun for the next 3 days." And I think they were like, "Oh," and they saw it, and it was like, "Oh." And so then one of the parents, uh, she commented, she said, "My daughter said you were like a true calm in the storm." I was like, "I like that." So introverts are the calm in the storm. Let's see, we got somebody in the clubhouse of being introvert, timid and shy, confused sometimes. All right, welcome A10. Yeah, that's what we're talking about. It's not something. There's nothing wrong with introverts. That's just things that people label introverts as. Yeah, if you can join us on Restream, A10, you can see us on there too. We're on Clubhouse, kind of like secondary, but we're kind of checking those comments.
Yeah, the
Um,
easiest
but okay,
spot. I was gonna say the easiest spot. The YouTube one is youtube.com/lyrical of invasion, and then my Facebook is where we're through. We got to get it through your Facebook, Mister Not
or
So Facebook.
maybe you can just post the
Well, you
link in the
can too.
chat.
You can, as the
Um,
co-host, you can post directly to your page too if you're not doing it already. That link that goes to you, I don't know if you put it on yours, but it shows so that they can
uh,
see in other words, they don't have to
right,
go to my page to see the transaction. But
right.
no, you know what I wanted to say though. I don't know if you were done on that, but there was something I wanted to.
No, I got. Well, you can cut in. All right, so we're well
No,
because
no,
all
no. Go.
right. I was gonna say a bunch of other stuff, like if you want some like things that I've done to to navigate certain things. If you're like me, you hate the name tag thing. Like, hey, my name is Bernard. Welcome to the party. I hate that. I've always hated name tags. So you know
The
what I started doing?
worst, the
I
worst
s-
ever.
I started using the name tag to say guess my name, and then I put like 1, 2, 3. Like you get 3 guesses, win a prize or something. Or put some
That's dope.
other question, put some
Like
other
that.
question on there, and people surprisingly people like sometimes it backfire because I said guess my name, or first time I put ask me a question, somebody said okay, what's your name? I was like, all right. So then I think I changed it to guess my name. So I turned it into a game because it's like I don't care about looking at your name tag and you looking at mine, and then we get caught in small talk. So what I did is I turned it into something that got beyond the surface quickly. Like if I force you to go into a question, you're now going, oh, okay, let me see. You look like a Mark. Nope, nope, close. Okay. Is it because now you can kind of be in control of the conversation. Um, I learned this a
It's
while
really not
ago.
close, by the way.
What?
Mark.
What? Right. No, I'm
You're
just
being
making up
very
stuff.
nice. Mm,
No, I was just making up stuff. But so like the thing that I learned about introverts is we're more object oriented. Like if I had a book in my hand or some kind of object, like people, you can use that as like a deflect, like point to the object. Like there's this pickup artist. I kind of learned this from. He was like, hey, if you want to talk to girls, he told the guys put on like a big hat or a feather boa. That way, if the girl came up to you, she could be like, oh, what's this? And like she'll be messing with. So have an object. Honestly, like if you're in a social situation, like your playing field is probably not words, at least not words in the small talk social setting, because it's not for me. Like even when you get me going on a topic like this, you can't stop me. But if I'm just meeting you and you're like, so where are you from, what dorm do you live in, oh where are you, I'm like, I don't care about
awkward.
any of these questions you're asking about where my dorm, where am I from, because then I'm thinking, how do I get out of these questions that you're trying to take me down, because now you're going to take me down some other boring path. So the question is, can you bring something to these events that's interesting to you that can
Mm,
break the ice? Like I haven't used this yet. I'm doing some other projects that involve this idea, but I taught in high school and I had this deck of cards with like questions, and they have the pastor I talked today, they have this like what are they called? I don't know, like philosophical cards, logic cards or something. Like maybe you have like a little deck of cards. You just
would
gotta
you
have something.
rather? Hmm,
Right, like, you just gotta have something interesting
yeah.
that you like, and to a certain degree, these people, they wanna talk about almost anything, so it's like, "Great, you wanna talk about almost anything? Let me direct you to what I'd like to talk about by giving you some options." Me and Pro talked about having a T-shirt that just says, like, "Okay, music, Star Trek, the uni like, what are these topics on my," like, you can make a shirt. I haven't tried this one yet, but I was gonna do this for the pandemic. I was gonna get a bunch of shirts printed with phrases like, you know, no weather, whatever. Something you need something engaging and interesting
Mm,
that's nonverbal
mm,
that can deflect the pressure off of you to have to talk, but it draws in the other people who want to talk. So you feel like, hey, I'm not shallow, but they also feel like, hey, great, I got to talk.
mm. I like the I'm equal opportunity with Star Trek and Star Wars. I favor Star Wars, but I first was exposed to Star Trek, right? So it's interesting because a lot of people are like, oh, you got to have one. You got to pick one. Like I got a DC, I got Green Lantern behind me, right? I love Marvel, but there are some great DC characters. Green Lantern is my joint. Like ever since I was a kid, man, I was like Green Lantern, uh, Star Trek. All the reason I would have that on my shirt is I would have DC or Marvel, Star Trek or Star Wars, because that's always interesting for me why people are one or the other. And then again, yeah, I want to pull you, Venus flytrap you into my world of geekdom. And I have you with that. And the people who, it's a natural selection thing. The people who want to speak about that are the ones I want to speak with, right?
Right,
It's like
right, right.
the people who don't, it's advertisement. This is what I want to talk about, right? Now, I was going to say something too earlier when you were talking. Also, when you were talking to the person in the room in the clubhouse thing, clubhouse is interesting because, like, that person, they didn't have too much of a bio in there, and I always think about that person as the introvert as well. Like the person that doesn't have the bio is probably an introvert, right? But then that's not always true because there's some amazing bios from some amazingly introverted people. Um, I've made mine shorter and shorter as I go. And one of the reasons mine is longer is because I find it difficult to categorize when you're a slash person, right? So it's like, oh, I got to talk about this and I got to talk about this. So the people know that, yeah, they can reach out to me here. It's kind of like the shirt. So the bio in Clubhouse is like the shirt. It's like, hey, these are the topics that I
Right.
want to talk about. You know what I mean? It's like, don't talk to me unless you want to talk about this kind of stuff right here. So I say Clubhouse in a way is a great place for introverts because you're setting the stage for what it is you want to talk about. You're going into a room with topics you're cutting through the small talk. You're going right into, hey, you're in this room on theology? Great. Like, I want to talk about that. I want to talk about, I'm in the rooms with the atheists. I'm in the rooms with the deists, the theologians, the philosophers, the scientists, the musicians, the teachers. Those are my joints, right? Everything else, like, there's varying degrees of if I even want to be in that conversation. But I'm extremely extroverted in those rooms, like Bernard, once I'm talking. I think most people wouldn't know that I'm an introvert, right? Because I'm in my joint.
Right.
I'm in, and that's what we meant by the college thing. It's like, if you can find the arenas of which you will blossom, that's where to spend your time. You can make college 100% what you want. And that's another thing I always tell freshmen, because they don't know. That person was a freshman. And it's like, I always say to them on the first day, because no one said it to me. Did you know when you go for your doctorate, you get to customize it about anything in the world that you want? Anything. And you get to be the world's expert on that really narrow topic. That's what how appealing is that for an introvert too? Like, yo, you want to go into your little sanctum space, the space that you don't think anyone else can even understand, you can get a doctorate in it. Now, some master's degree programs do that too, but the bachelor's and the associate's degrees, you're largely doing the prescriptive, boring thing that they already have picked out for you. Some schools are letting you specialize more and more, and they're starting to go the way of that. But how much of a great sell is that for an introvert? Because I'm telling you, if you told me on the first day of my going for my bachelor's degree that, hey, this is going to be real boring for a while, you're going to have this initial excitement because you're going to be like, oh, look, new classes, new people. What is this? I get to go where I'm supposed to go, and no one tells me. It's not like high school anymore. Once that wears off, you're going to be like, oh, this sucks. Like, I got to do all these lessons I don't even want to do, about all these classes I'm not interested in. When can I get to the stuff that's in my major? That's usually what most college students are saying. When can I get to the architecture? I don't want, me, I liked all my classes except for the ones that I really knew I didn't like, right? There was a narrow field. I didn't want to do accounting. I knew it had some value, but I was generally going to drift off and write rhymes in accounting. But yet, I got to economics and I'm like, yo, this speaks to me, right? Some people would say that's really, really boring. But the point is, the higher up you go, the more you get to tailor it. And I always think that's an interesting paradigm. The higher up you go, the more it gets tailored. So the bottom of the pyramid is filled with a bunch of junk. That's why it's so wide, right? And as you go up, you're cutting out all the fat. And it's like, focus now on you, because or what it is that interests you, because this was to make you well-rounded, right? This bottom piece here. And so is college in general. You're figuring it out. You're figuring where to go. As you move through and you progress, it becomes about you and your interest. And that's, to me, an eyes on the prize kind of thing. I'm like, if you can get through this crap, man, you can customize it. And here's the real kicker, of course, you're actually able to customize a lot of what you're doing in college. You just don't know it yet. You don't feel like you have the liberty to do that. Like, if you present to an instructor, hey, could I do it on? Most of the time, they just want engagement too. They're just trying to find out the thing that's going to engage you too. They just don't know. They're not experts on engagement. They're experts on being experts on a narrow topic because they went through college and usually got to the top of the pyramid too. So they're not great on engagement all the time. And, it's just an interesting thing. I just think we don't do that enough with our students and let them pick, let them choose, let them become the experts in a very narrow thing. Instead, we're trying to give this general washover that
Right.
really loses more people and does more harm than good in many cases, even though I get the idea.
I mean, I guess, yeah, I'm thinking of other things like articles I've read about introverts, because the introverts get penalized for like not participating in class discussion kind of thing, even though they had a lot of good things to say. And then the TA be like, "Oh, I just never heard from you." I forgot what the techniques that people I forgot what techniques people said they did to change that. Here's the things that I have in those ideas. Like I was in this Bible study once, and the guy he said, he's like, "Hey Bernard, like I know you got a lot of good stuff to say. I just wish you would speak." And I was like, "Well, it's kind of hard when there's 30 people in the room." So I said, "If you call on me, I will definitely talk." But the problem for the introvert is like you wait for the silence. You're like, "Okay, you're done." And then as soon as you talk, somebody else is like, "I had something," and you're like, "Oh my
Mhm,
goodness!" Like, "Oh, can you shut up?"
mhm,
So you might have to like talk to the person, the TA or the professor after class and say, like, "Hey, look, I have tons to say. is there any chance like you could just call upon me, or is there any way, I don't know, I could do a one-on-one, because it's not that I don't want to participate. It's just it's difficult to participate, especially when it's a limited class and everyone's talking, and people are cutting you off. I mean, that it depends on the professor, the TA. I tell people like, I actually, as I was cleaning out my car, I found my stick. Speak softly but carry a big stick. People think I'm playing. When I was teaching in high school, my students wouldn't listen. I had a rod and I was banging on the desk like, "Hey, I'm tired of using my voice. It's tired. I have a big stick." So you might, back to the objects thing. Like, I think objects sometimes help you stand out. So you might have to, like, I don't know, literally like stand up. Like, I don't know if ever he's got to say. I mean, it may be. I mean, here's how I think about life. Right. I think for introverts, we are more object oriented than people oriented, and I think we're more action oriented than verbally oriented. So it may be literally like a physicality thing where you're like, "Hey, I got to position myself in the classroom if possible, like to sit near to the TA or something, or like, yeah, where you sit in the class so that you can be seen." Because I'm sure we all dealt with this growing up. I would hate it. Like, you'd raise your hand and then the teacher would be like, "Oh, I'll get you. You can put your hand down." And I would keep my hand up and they'd be like, "No, no, it's okay." And I'm like, "Okay." Put my hand down, and then after the next person's talk, "Oh, Sally," I'm like, "This is why I kept my hand up, because
Right.
I knew you were going to forget, because you can't retain all this stuff." So I think somehow making yourself visually, physically, like Pro
Like
right
this.
now, he's physically distracting you. I mean, it may have to be something.
Clubhouse, I have Luke Skywalker.
I mean, literally, like I said, you got
Sorry,
to
I had the
see
mic
all.
off. Clubhouse. Clubhouse, I had Luke Skywalker.
You have to see a lot of this like a game. Like, that's the problem. I think a lot of introverts kind of enter it like, "Oh, this is the gauntlet. I'm eating a light." No, no, no. Like, this is your playing field. They be like, "Okay," just like you play chess or you're connecting the dots of ideas philosophically. You're like, "Okay, what is going on with this game called the discussion group? Like, who are the players? What are the points? How can I win this game? How can I get or not even win the game? How can I just get the amount of points that I need?" So, like, I don't know.
Mm.
You might have to like wear the same color hoodie all the time or something.
Hmm.
So just to make yourself stand out. Like, just think about different things that are untraditional that you might be able to do to make yourself established. Because you and I both know, me and everybody who's an introvert knows. Once people hear you speak, they're like, "Oh my goodness." They're like, "Wow, how come we never let you speak before?" You're like, "I know. I know. Thank you." Because once they hear that first insight, they're like, "Oh, we need to shut up from now." Because I heard people say
Right.
that to me. They're like, "Man, I need to shut up from now on." I was like, "I know. We've been trying to get to that point. I've been trying to get to the shut up point for you." So once they hear you, they're more aware of like, "Oh, this person has a lot to say if the rest of us would be quiet." So I think it's the most difficult thing for the introvert is like breaking that first time. So you got to figure out some creative ways. Like I said, wear the same hoodie, sit closer to the TA or the professor. Try to make some noise that's not with your voice, like, I don't know, like close the book or something, so that people look at you like, "Yeah, I wanted to say something." Like, you have to sometimes not use your voice, because I know that's the hardest thing about introverts. It's getting your voice above the noise. So sometimes make a sound or something. Call.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I wanted to say something.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. The tactic I had one of my faculty members do when I was a student, and I've stolen it a couple times. And I did a really bad job this semester, though. I did a really bad job getting the most interaction I wanted to from my students. They said, a couple of them said early on, they said, "We haven't been in a physical classroom for over 2 years." And I was like, it shows. Like, I didn't want to be the stand-up comedian heckling the audience, but I was like, you guys are a tough audience, right? Like, it was a tough. They did not want to interact starting out, and I'm generally a pretty easy person to interact with. Like,
Right.
that's usually the main thing that gets written. Like, man, he's so caring, compassionate. He'll let you do whatever. You can talk. You run the show. It's not all about him. Blah blah blah. It has to be, though, when they're not talking. So you have to be like, you find yourself talking more than you want to talk. Obviously, if they're not talking. It isn't like Clubhouse. We can just be quiet. I mean, you can't really just be quiet when you're teaching the class and you have a quieter group. You still have to make the class work. And I was trying to think of like a lot of my own advice that I could take. I had a faculty member who he would do this. It's very basic, and I know other people have done it, but he just did it in a really cool way. He would take, and you can do whatever you want. He would do straws, and so he had straws, and he wrote numbers on them, and like they said 1, 2, 3, or 4, and he told you every day he was going to give you a little straw, and the little number that he had written on it was your score, and he would just let you know. He would let you, but it wasn't final. Like he'd let you know when you were at a 1. He let you know when you were at a 2. Actually, if you were there, you were at a 1. And so if you didn't get a straw, you weren't moving up, right? So as soon as he walked by, and he was real subtle with it. This was a graduate course too. This wasn't like little kid stuff. He's walking, and it was at Harvard, by the way. And he's walking by, and it was a math course. He's walking by, and boom, he's like, "Oh, cool." And sometimes he'd slip you 2, 2, 3, and the way that he did it was he was quality, not quantity. So if you did something enlightening, or you helped your group, and it was a lot of group work, and so if you facilitated something, he would just do watch. He'd stand up at the board, write a little prompt, and then he'd be watching. He'd say, "What do you think?" What we call inquiry-based learning. And so I was trying to take a page from him. I was trying to do more inquiry-based learning, and trying to, do the prompt. I'm doing the prompts, and they're not working. I'm like, these prompts usually work. And then I had to remember they haven't been in a class, right, for a couple of years. These are mostly 18-year-olds who've gone through the better part now of their life, of their high school career, not actually being that engaged, right? Wow, right? So it's a different phenomenon than we've had before, and trying to think about how we can get people engaged is tough. I mean, the title of this thing, this whole socially conscious, creative, unconscious. I want to touch back on this more to the topic. I love when I hear something that's socially conscious and creative at the same time. I say this all the time. Most socially conscious rap is terrible. It's just, I don't like it. Like, I feel like it's someone being real preachy, telling me how,
Right.
what, you know what I mean? And it's like, and so it's the same way when someone says, "Hey, do you write rap songs about math?" It's like, no, that's not really, I know I should, right? Because that's what everybody wants. But it's like, I write a line here and there. I write it because I don't want to be the dude doing math raps for you, because you're just gonna be like, no, that's not creative. It's
Right.
creative when you do it creatively. But if I just write a rap today about, I could do it for a book, or for someone, if someone says, "Hey, can you write a whole book on calculus and make it raps?" Yes. Right. Like that. Yeah, that would be my jam too. But that's not the kind of songs I want to make. So it makes me think this: how creative can you get about a topic that is meaningful, right? I found when I was coming up in hip hop that it was easier to be creative when I didn't have a topic. There's someone just like sort of like free write, right? Like free write and kind of stumble into something. And then all of a sudden I'd go, "Hey, let me narrow in on this." And then I'd kind of hit it. But I think like the prompt could change. Like, and even think of the prompt in our own lives, not like necessarily in class. Like, how could you creatively solve this problem? Like, how, let's say your joint is, climate change. How can you creatively talk about climate change in a way that someone else hasn't, to put it on the map, pun intended, to put it on the map in a way that no one else has done before? And that is what takes that creative unconscious, the loop there. You need to be out walking and just thinking, kind of blah, 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 walking and letting those organic thoughts, let that engine be on in the backdrop for your whole day. Ask yourself that question: how can I creatively tackle this topic? And don't stress it, just let it come, right? And when the first
Right.
idea comes, build upon that one. Those are the songs or the projects or the whatever that get me. I'm like, oh, they flipped that this way. Are you kidding
Right.
me? Right? Like, that's what we're waiting for. It's to your point about, you want to go to the show with the freestyle. Also, I meant to go back to that point that you made earlier too about, like, it's live. You want to see that person being live. They're alive. You didn't say live, they're alive, right? And, or probably both. The other part we have to acknowledge is, and you kind of did, you said this, you're more excited, right? And the fact that you'd rather do that comes across to the audience. They know you want to be there. And that's the thing that's important for us as educators, right? Students always saying that. Like we need to know if they care, if they really want to be there. If you're mailing it in, students know, right? If you're mailing it in, the audience knows. So when we're
Right.
just doing the rehearsal of the lyrics that we did, and we didn't put any flair or any mustard on it, it's kind of like, man, I could have just listened to your CD. You didn't give me something different. Even though a lot of
Right.
times the biggest compliment is, man, he sounds just like he does on CD. But they
Right.
mean vocal quality. They still want you
Right.
to like sell it, and be that beast when you need to be that beast. But how can you creatively do it? And I think the freestyle nature, the unexpected, the happens when people who are prepared and feel willing to come off script, much like a freestyle in itself. So,
Right.
giving people the space to freestyle, giving the space to people to be creative who have not had enough space to just think so that they can freestyle is the issue. So, are we giving students space to breathe? So, I was like, take it full circle. I'm like, maybe what I'm doing is I'm not giving my students enough time. And sure enough, when I did mid-semester feedback, that's what they said. They said it to the other faculty. The faculty member came in. He's like, "Hey, man, they really love you, but here's the negatives, right?" And I was like, "All right," bracing myself. He's like, "He goes a little bit too fast." And I was like, "Oh, really, man? I've been really trying to go extra slow because I knew the group was a little." And they're like, "Well, you kind of think they've gotten the topic, and they really don't, and they don't want to stop you. They don't feel comfortable jumping." So I'm not letting it breathe and let it just sit with them and just give them the quiet time to be like, you know what? Let's just take 10 minutes and you just ruminate on this topic for yourself or in groups of two, whatever. I'm just going to go up here. I'm going to play a little music. And I got away from that. I used to do that all the time. I didn't do that this semester. I felt the pressure to try to correct them and make up for you know, their time out of the class by doing
Right.
the mistake of like, let me hit you with this. Oh, I gotta get you this. Oh, your skills seem a little soft here. Ooh, let me backfill with this, and before you know it, there was no air to breathe.
Well, I got a bunch to say to that, and to weave all the topic, and to speak to what AS was asking too. Because one thing I was thinking was like, okay, how do you be an introvert? Is like, this is probably the hardest thing to do, which is what people call self advocacy, right? Like, kind of expecting someone else to know your preferences and how you act. I get it, because you walk into a room, it's like, how come no one's like making room for the introverts? It's just because, well, the extroverts have dominated for so long. Like, no one's thinking like, oh yeah, by the way, we should take silence right now. And like, they're not thinking that. So you have to just like remind yourself, like, oh right, I got to step in here and like introduce this to find maybe like a TA who gets it and is like, hey, you probably noticed blah 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 when I'm in the group I don't, and like, oh yeah, I did, like, so I just want you to know, like, I'm more comfortable. Oh, okay. So you might have to just self advocate. Secondly, I was going to say, similarly with that is like, here's the funny thing about the introverts, right? We're the ones who usually observe what's going wrong, but are the ones who are usually never asked about it, and the ones who never usually interject it. And the whole time, the very thing that would help us with our own problem is the observation we're having. So we're probably saying, like, hey, this group is too big, but nobody thinks that's a bad thing. They're thinking, great, our discussion group is so packed with 25 people. And you're thinking, nothing of quality is getting done, though. And so if you be the first person to initiate to the TA or the professor, like, hey, just want to let you know, I might not be the only one, but there's a few of us who are like, this is kind of big to get into an in-depth discussion about this paper you want. It's like, we can't really get into the meat of it. It's like, it just remains surface. So I don't really feel like I'm getting a lot. Maybe that person will be like, oh, I wasn't even aware of that. So you might have to like advocate, just not for yourself, but like for all introverts, in a sense, like, hey, no one has probably ever told you this. To the points that Pro was making about like the uncoerced, the unforced, the unconscious. I think it's interesting to think about hip hop, freestyle, and all the things we were mentioning at the beginning in relation to this. So it's like, because all this gets simplified to is like, are you being yourself? Right? Like, yeah, we're talking about introverts and how they are, but honestly, that's just like the second layer of myself. Like, I know I'm an introvert, but the first thing I'm like, oh, I'm me, I'm Bernard. So when I walk into a room, like, I know I have something to offer as a person uniquely from who I am. And part of that is being an introvert. So I think the idea of, you know, like Pro was just saying, like, are you taking enough space for yourself, right? Your professor, your TA, the social groups, they're not going to give that to you. You got to be doing that on your own time. Carve out sacred time for yourself to really know who you are, develop who you are. So when you go into groups, it's like, oh, okay, I've done that work. Now when I'm out here amongst people, I know what I can contribute. But if you're not forming yourself, knowing who you are, developing yourself, then when you get in there, you're just trying to hold it all together. You're like, don't mess up. Like, don't, don't speak incorrectly. Be like you're just dealing so much with the anxiety of being in that place that all your attention is focused on that versus like focused on the task. This is a book, Daniel Goleman, he talks about emotional intelligence. He said a lot of people fail tests because all their energy is focused on the anxiety of taking the test that they can't even focus
Mhm.
on taking the test.
Right.
So if you don't do that prep work of working on yourself in your dorm, with other introverts, like I mean, that's a really another thing I heard somebody say once. This preacher TD Jakes, this woman got up and asked him a question. She said, "My sister." She's like, "My best adult dating stuff." Okay. uh my my sister, she said, "My sister, we can't talk. I have so much to say, and she has so little to say. And we seem to miss one another." And he was like, "Look," he said, "you just need to realize you're a 10-gallon person and she's like a 2-gallon person. Nothing wrong with her, nothing wrong with you. You just need to hang out with more 10-gallon type people." And I know that can be hard to find, especially as introverts, because you probably been looking for them. You're like, "Yo, probably found this podcast," and was like, "Oh, finally, 2 people in the whole world who know what I'm talking about." But it does help when you find like-minded people to be able to like vent and connect and understand. Because then when you go out in those other like contexts of social class, you're not as like hungry for that. Like it's still there, but you're like, "Hey, I talk with Pro, I talk with Bernard, like we talked about all this. Now when I come in here, at least someone who so at least someone who I know gets me. So when I come out here, I don't have to try to feel like I'm being misunderstood and at the same time I'm like failing my discussion group for class. You can focus more on just what you need to do versus trying to focus on who you are." The other thing I was going to say, yeah, just like the idea of unconsciousness, right? I think we all know that whenever you start to overly focus on something, you start to mess up. Me and Pro talk about this all the time. The more we like try to think about some poem that we've already memorized and we start like, what's the next line? Like we start to forget the lines. So there is something about resting and being yourself in that unconscious
Mhm.
flow. But
Mhm.
like Pro was saying, like if you try to do that in the moment, yeah, you're still gonna be nervous and anxious because you've never done that before.
Mhm.
Right? Like if you've never gotten on stage and performed, now is
Mhm.
not the time to try to be confident
Right.
because you've never done this before. But if you've practiced being unconscious and like we're not talking about performing. Me and Pro talk about performing because that's what we do. But let's say
Mhm.
you're in a party, a discussion group. Like if you're waiting to get into that tense moment of emotions, it's probably not going to play out well because you forgot, like, oh, right, this is real life. Like I was saying about the person who freestyles, like, oh, that guy is alive. But here's the thing that I figured out about creative people and introverts. Like, our biggest power is our imagination, right? The thing that we have, the thing that we access the most as introverts, our internal world, we can use that to our advantage. So if you're like, oh man, I'm having real trouble in my discussion group or talking in this party or whatever, go back with your other friends. It's like, hey, can we role play this? Like, can we come up with scenarios and imagine and write scripts and play this out? Like, I mean, that sounds funny because most people probably wouldn't do this for their life. But if you have the ability to say, hey, next time I'm in this TA group, I'm gonna have some stuff in the auxiliary that I can pull upon, then you should do that because now what you're doing is you're creating options for yourself. You're saying, hey, last time when I was in this conversation, I didn't know what to say. And I couldn't think of it in the moment because my nerves overtook me. But if you've practiced playing this out, at least you have an idea of what you might say. So the next time it happens, you're like, oh right, I did do that. I did study that. I did think of that. It's just like anything else. You take a test and you don't study, what do you think's gonna happen? That's what I tell people. If you don't study to be a human, if you don't study life, like when you go out into the test of life, it's not gonna go well. So use your imagination off, quote unquote, off camera, off the record, off site. When you're not in these places that you feel anxiety about, practice the anxious situations, make up scenarios, take actual
Mm,
scenario.
mm,
I did this in a drama troupe I used to be in. We used to play our life out in practice and get help with our life.
mhm. I wanted to say I have a mic issue for Clubhouse, so my mic is kind of shut down. So I'll try to end these comments and wrap up. I typed it in the chat there. Maybe you want to take a second and tell them if you want, and then I'll just kind of wrap it up over here if you want. Is that all right? You want to tell the
Wait,
Clubhouse?
yeah,
I'm,
Clubhouse. Pearl's got a mic issue. Maybe I'll try to put his
do a
mic,
translation of Pro.
or I'll put my headphones to
Yeah, no,
the
I'd
mic.
wrap it up here with a couple both. I definitely got to be off at 8 anyways. But let me say this: I talked earlier about subconscious and dreaming, and I dream every night. And what I can remember of it, I'm astounded by the realness of my dreams. The things I create, the songs my brain has created for me when I get up on a stage and I hear a song that it doesn't exist, right? I get up there, I hear a song that doesn't exist. My brain has thought of all the words. I get up there and I'll freestyle. So I'm freestyling. I freestyled the entire dream. Like you have freestyled your entire dream, right? And my dreams, when I look at them on the big screen of my brain, I'm like, holy crap, how can this possibly be a dream, right? Like this is unbelievable. But it's all the things that I was just thinking about. So it's not like, oh, we're in some other dimension. I don't subscribe to any of that. If we are, we're in a dimension that is so next to the one that we're living in, it's crazy, right? And maybe that's possible. But I would say this: we got to give ourselves credit for what we can do in our subconscious, what we can do when we're asleep. The confidence that I have in my creativity partially comes from that because I'm like, well, I am the biggest beast. I can't wait to go to sleep because I'm the biggest beast in the world with my creativity when I'm like, oh my gosh. The dream I had the other night because Jupiter was close to the moon and I was talking about it with my son, looking through a telescope before we went to bed. I had a whole dream about alien invasions coming over Jupiter and the moon, and it was just crazy. But the imagery of this ship that was coming over, I was finally like, yo, the conspiracy theorists are right. I have to admit I'm wrong. I was telling people, calling people in my family, I'm like, yo, the aliens are coming. It was hilarious, but it was also extremely vivid. The building that I was in was a recreation of the building I used to live in, but it was totally different and just recustomized. What we can do is unfathomably incredible, but we have to believe it. So
Right,
you have to believe this, to Bernard's point too. Like, if you're too fixated on the lyric, we forget it and we screw up. Not only that though, Bernard, let's tell him the real truth. Let's tell him what you've had to do to try to remember a line in the middle of your song. You have to forget what your lyrics are so that it will come back to you, right? You have to stop
right,
paying attention, trick your brain. We've all done this, right? Ah, man, if I keep fixating on it, I'm going to screw it up because I know that I've said this lyric 50,000 times. And for some reason, I can't remember the bar that I say after the fourth bar. And so I just have to trick my brain into not paying attention. Like I'm just going to not even pay attention. I'm going to say it automatically, like I'm on autopilot, and boom, all of a sudden, oops, there it goes. When you weren't thinking, your brain sometimes takes 2 or 3 times to do this. We don't always get it right the first time, right? But that is an amazing trick that I do all the time. I'm like, I'm so fixated on the word, I'm never going to get it. Now I have to forget it so that I'm into the autopilot way of thinking. And that's a different recall. When we do autopilot, our brain just knows it, right? But when we're fixed on it, we don't. This is connected too to the sort of trusting yourself, trusting your subconscious, trusting the fact that your brain's got you if you've done the preparedness. Last point with that too that is very similar, I'd want to say this, is that I always considered myself not to be a very smart person, especially when I was in like middle school. When you're finding yourself and you're like, maybe I'm not as smart as the other kids. Maybe they're smarter than me. Maybe blah blah blah. Right? We start doubting ourselves. Some of you are going through that now, or you've gone through it, or you will. If you're very fortunate, you haven't gone through that yet. But my suspicion is that most of us have thought that at one point or another. erasing that from your psyche is super important. And I think the more you dwell in your power zone, which hopefully is creativity, and for a lot of introverts it is, you can
Right.
push that to the side, and the creative can give you back the self-esteem. You can go, whoa, I actually can create something that no one else has done before. This is what makes me unique. This is what gives me my superpower. But we have to trust that it's going to come when you give yourself the space, much like the freestyle. If we give ourselves the space, we can create amazing things. If we give ourselves the time, we can produce amazing things when put to task, if we've put in the prep work. So to Bernard's point, how you think you're going to do on the test, when you freestyle it, you're going to do poorly if you didn't prepare. It's almost impossible, right? Except my last point, and then I'm going to shut up. I did a basketball refereeing test. I had a online for IBO, Board 12. Shout out to Board 12 in Maryland. They're due by today. I did mine yesterday. Of course I did. I got a 90, but I think I had 100, and the test shut down. It gave me 40 questions of basketball rules, and then the last 5 where you had to watch the video. And I'm hitting the rules interpreter up, and I'm saying to him, yo, the media is not loading. And I'm like, I can hit the button and trick it and go back, and I can see what the last question was, but the media is not there. So I got 3 of the 5 questions correct that were multiple choice, right? So, if you get 5 questions, there's 5 multiple choice answers on each. The probability is you're going to get 1 out of 5. I got 3 out of 5. I told him, I said, I can probably get a couple of these right. And the reason is because just figuring out the scenario and what they were trying to get at, using a little bit of psychology and trusting that you're not an idiot, right? There were 2 of them that just said, what should the referee do in this situation? I mean, you really don't have any chance with that one, right? He should let the play go as it was. He should call a foul. He should, that's a really hard one. That's really a crapshoot. But some of the other ones were evoking a rule that I know what the sticky point is of that rule and what they were probably trying to test for. Right. So my point is that I had the confidence to know that I'm smart enough to get it because of the preparation that I've done, even when I don't know the exact full scenario. And this is what we con ourselves out a lot of time of doing. And our students do too. They give up when they don't have enough information. They quit too early. They go, I can't, how can I do that one? I didn't prepare for that. It doesn't mean to say you won't get any right on the test. We're saying you're not going to do well. It doesn't mean you're not going to get any of them right,
Right.
So you don't want to quit on yourself early, and you don't want to you want to give yourself a chance. You want to give yourself a chance. So always, you always got to show up. You always got to prepare. You always got to do your best, and you shouldn't quit, because what'll happen is something amazing can happen right before you're about to quit is usually the best part of when it kicks in. And we build these kinds of confidence through our creative, through our subconscious when we're preparing, even when we're sleeping, it's doing the job for us. Your brain will work overtime for you, I believe,
Right.
when you put in that intention in your day to day.
Well, the last thing I'll say, it's kind of similar idea of like working when you're not working. Like you're saying, your subconscious is working when you're not working. So when you wake up, it's like, ooh, inspiration. Like I wouldn't have thought about that if I was awake, but my free subconscious gave me that idea. Great. So it's similar kind of thing. Whereas I was saying, like, if you're in a social setting, class setting, whatever, like that's the work moment or the testing of yourself. So when you're outside of that, it's like you got to be working when you're not working, in the sense that there's probably something that you do naturally that you don't even consider is work. You're just like, oh, I'm writing, or I'm reading, or I'm watching these documentaries, or I'm painting. That's why we say social introvert, creative extrovert. So you all introverts are extroverts, but it's usually in the creative sphere. Like I say, whenever people get around me, they're probably really annoyed. They're like, "Oh, why is this guy always talking about rap and freestyle? Why is he always trying to get me to draw? And like, shut up, leave me alone." But I'm like, "No, come on, we can. Everybody come to the front. Everybody move to the front." I hate when people tell me to move to the front in a social setting, but I'm that guy in the creative setting. Everybody gather in. We're gonna rap right now. So I'm probably very annoying. It's just that you probably don't experience that sense of being that dominant person, because the creative sphere, and at least America, I don't know where you live, AS, but American society, it's not like the creative sphere is what you go to every day from 9 to 5. So you don't experience being the dominant type there. But you probably notice that when you tell people to be creative, they're like, "Oh, me? No." And you're like, what's the big deal? We're just creating, right? That's probably how they feel about conversation. They're like, "Hey, where are you from?" And you're like, "Whoa, whoa, whoa, this is too much." So remember that you do have a context where you are being quote unquote extroverted, creatively extroverted. And so when you just spend, like Pro was saying, when you spend time there, not even trying, but you're building your confidence of just being yourself. Because I guarantee you, if that person called on you was like, who's seen this documentary? You're like, yeah, so basically this is what happened in the documentary, blah, 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 blah. And people are like, oh my goodness, you know everything. It's like, yeah, I watch that all the time. It's like, I don't even try. So that builds that subconscious confidence that Pro's talking about. It's just you have to start learning how to tap into that when you're in the other context. Like, how can I bring that confidence that I have when I'm painting or drawing or doing whatever that's usually not in the general environment? How can I tap into that? How can I find that doorway in? And it, like I said, you're gonna have to be creative in how you figure out how to do that. But I think that's where you can find your confidence, how to be that introvert in the college arena.
Word up. Well said, and more succinctly than I did. Well, Henry's on the floor here, so that means my time is up. And we gotta wrap it up. But yeah, great talk. And I'm gonna try to make sure I have some unconsciously good dreams. Henry, I was talking about my dream of the alien spacecraft taking over the world. Yes, you remember that one? Yeah, it was like 2 nights ago. All right, we out of here, folks. Number 25.
Peace.
Peace.